Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Tove Lo called Blue Lips. Is it safe for me to say that I had low expectations going into this record? Because I remember having the feeling that Tove Lo had so much damn promise coming out of Queen of the Clouds back in 2014. Clearly ambitious with a lot of personality and charisma, aiming to touch on darker, more sexual, more nakedly dangerous and reckless material in her lyrics, and with the sharp songwriting and knack for pop hooks that made her a hell of a rising talent. And then 2 years later, all that went right out the window with Ladywood, the first half of a two-part project that left a lot of listeners wondering whether the second half would be worth all the bother. The melodies have been sucked away, the deliveries had shoved apart the melodramatic impulses and intensity back into the murk, and despite clearly trying to convey some sort of potent story, the record felt more conceptually underweight than ever, almost a retread of some of the elements in Queen of the Clouds. And that makes for kind of an awkward admission on my part. For as many times as I have listened to that record, even just a year later, I don't remember it at all. And that's not a good sign going into this record's sequel. Now, reportedly, this was aiming to be a more emotive and expressive record, less of the dark tech house elements and more straightforward dance-leaning pop. Hell, if your lead-off single is called Disco Tits, it's clear that you're definitely trying for less subtlety this time around. But on the flip side, it wasn't as if she switched up her production or her writing teams, so there was a very real possibility that this record could wind up as barren and swamped out as her last record. But hey, Blue Lips couldn't get worse than Ladywood, right? Well, okay, you know what? It's not worse than Ladywood. But the more listens I gave to Blue Lips, the more I seriously questioned how much more I can get out of records like this from Tove Lo. Because while this is better than Ladywood, I'll say it again, it's not better than Queen of the Clouds, and more than ever, it feels like Tove Lo is recycling the exact same formula on her projects with the exception of the details, somehow getting more and more blunt with each release, and yet hitting consistently diminishing returns. And as much as Tove Lo has emphasized in interviews about this record how she's never satisfied and that sustaining and not growing almost equals failure in her eyes, and that's a theme that's apparently underlying this record. More on that in a bit because I don't really see that coming through. When we're retracing the same steps for the third record in a row, a lot of those conclusions, a lot of those interviews can get a little harder to support, even if I do think the record's overall kind of decent. And we're going to start off with the content this time around because just like Queen of the Clouds and Ladywood, the first half of this record is a string of hookups and the second half is the come down, where something more real is attempted and then it blows up in her face. And you know what? To her credit, while the lyrics are not quite as specific or narrative driven as her debut record, they don't quite feel as murky or indistinct as Ladywood did, most because they feel a fair bit less complex, especially on the first half of the record where the bisexual drug-fueled hookups are approached with the sort of straightforward candor that really has always been Tove Lo's hallmark. And on the second half of the record, there is at least a shred of some self-awareness, and that's welcome for what she has done in the past to compromise or maybe even sabotage some of these relationships. Not quite taking responsibility just yet, but the seeds are there, and I can appreciate that. At least on Cycle, she acknowledges the pattern that she's in, and she's pleading with her new partner to disregard that cycle, if only to give her a little bit more stability going forward, a stability that she will then undermine and reject because she can't get out of her own damn head on songs like Struggle, or how she didn't want a normal kind of love on the breakup of 9th of October, especially as there is a sense of regret for eventually being the pulling the trigger and ending it. And on the first sign of some real growth for her, we get the 1-2 punch of Bad Days and Hey You Got Drugs. The first a desperate but failed attempt to revive something with this guy who clearly cared about her, and the latter just showing her returning to the club. But for as much as the drugs used to provide her some form of release, it's an escape that's dulled for her because she's built up a tolerance. And with the fading of old feelings, you get the sense that there's finally some way forward that she can break out of that cycle. It's a solid ending. It's easily the best song on the record. It shows real potential going forward. I will give her that. And man alive, I wish it carried so much more impact, and most of that comes with Tove Lo herself in a lot of the writing and the singing. Now, I've never had a problem with the more straightforward, reckless sexuality that's come through in a lot of her writing that's scandalized so many people. But there is a balance in maintaining that sensual appeal and a bluntness that can almost feel clinical, and more often than not, this record kind of fumbles it. And sure, you can see the subtext behind some of that on the first half of this record is how the sex is more routine, so why not be as blunt as possible to make an impact, but you you can tell that she's trying to sell these encounters as being more sexy, which makes songs like Disco Tits and Shivering Gold and especially Bitches hit an oddly desperate, rather unsexy note. Bitches is unquestionably the worst of all this, where it's clear that she's got some form of contempt for the girls that she can so easily get to sleep with her, even as she completely does not trust him. And not only is it unconvincing, you get lines like dripping in harmony like Fifth, or how they have to dry off the seat when they get up. It's not a good sign when Halsey tackled the same territory earlier this year with Strangers and somehow did it better. But then we have to get to the vocals, and you know what? I'll give Tove Lo points for more emoting on these songs in comparison with Ladywood, but these are points I'm taking away immediately because of how pitchy and slapdash her vocal technique can be on this record. Again, I get why she's doing it. Show more of a raw, reckless edge as part of her whole appeal. But with her voice placed much closer to the front of the mix this time, you get every single moment of sloppy enunciation and her peaking in the vocal layering, and it gets grating, especially when she can play a little bit more in her lower register and sound a lot better. She does so on this album. I wish she did it more. And that's not even touching on some of the vocal production, which loves to place pitch-shifted multi-tracking right behind her, including chipmunk tones. The last thing we need was that. And the only place that's even kind of works are the 80s-inspired robotic layers on Struggle that I kind of liked. But this takes us to a lot of the compositions themselves. And look, again, it's better than Ladywood, but I would be lying if I said this record really gripped me on an instrumental level. Yeah, there's more melody this time around to anchor the hooks, but whenever the sloppily tuned keyboards aren't a faded murmur, they trend toward rubbery atonal shifts that remind me of someone pulling from Arca's soundboard and stumbling really hard with it, especially when you pair it with obvious trap snares and hi-hats, as if we haven't had enough of those this year. The synths, they wobble and contort and tend to rely on some underlying beats for any sort of groove, and when the percussion line can't deliver there, as it often can, the record tends to lose a lot of momentum for me, which is not good for these sort of pop songs. And what baffles me is how inconsistent it is. Yes, I'm not crazy about how the vocals peak on Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but at least with the sleigh bells and the growing buzzy rumble at the base of the mix, there is some momentum to the track, and that's followed by a real guitar line on Stranger that actually has some groove to it, a trend that will return on Bad Days, and it connects pretty well. What doesn't work nearly as well as all the clip pitch shifting on She Don't Know But She Knows. It seems to have a sax tone on the bridge but has no idea what to do with it, or the wonking tuning on Shivering Gold, or the flattened warping of Cycles, or the undercooked blockiness of Bitches. At least some of the sandier touches around Romantics kinda connected for me against the trap breakdown with way too much pitch shifting, but then it also featured the vocals of rapper Day Jack, who has nowhere near the presence to match Tove Lo, and kind of feels tacked on because, well, they couldn't get Wiz Khalifa this time around. And that highlights some of my big frustrations with this album, because for as much as this record retraces many of the same steps, there are some C's that show how Tove Lo can evolve going forward, and it certainly is more memorable overall in comparison with Ladywood. And again, I like having Tove Lo making mainstream pop music. She certainly seems to want to push harder. There is ambition here. But you know what? With less lyrical subtlety, a production team that has twice misunderstood Tove Lo's strengths as a singer, giving her a production that's either undercooked experimentation or painfully by the numbers, and a general lack of refinement overall without a raw edge to justify it, I find Blue Lips kinda hard to recommend. If I do give this a pass, it's an extremely light 6 out of 10, pretty much entirely for the sticking the landing with Hey You Got Drugs. It's a great ending for the record, but it's really just for fans at this point. And as for me reviewing more of this, well, I've heard her tell a very similar story 3 times now, and if she switches it up, okay, maybe. We'll see. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Folks, I want to like this, and it is better than Ladywood, but not by much. And if you want to buy the record, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you guys who think I'm incredibly wrong on this, and I know there'll be a few of you. Beyond that, if you guys have anything in terms of writing or presentation that I can improve here, I'm happy to hear it. And if you guys want to support this channel or get more involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.